The silence was the first thing that hit you. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, shocked silence, the kind that presses down on your ears and steals the air from your lungs. In the dusty central square of Orphan village, a place usually buzzing with the noise of market day, the only sound was the gentle hum of a V12 engine and the crunch of expensive leather shoes on dry earth. A fleet of 5 vehicles, all gleaming black and impossibly clean, had rolled into the village like a slow-moving storm front. They were not trucks or Land Cruisers. They were phantoms from another world. 2 Rolls-Royce Phantoms, 2 Mercedes Maybachs, and a single formidable Brabus G-Wagon that looked like it could swallow the chief's entire house. From the lead Maybach, a man emerged. He was tall, dressed in a navy blue Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than every goat in Orphan combined. His hair was flecked with silver at the temples, and his face was calm, betraying nothing. Bodyguards in sharp, dark suits fanned out, creating a silent, unbreachable perimeter. The villagers, frozen mid-haggle, stared. Phones, old and cracked, slowly came out, held by trembling hands. This was a sight beyond their comprehension. Chief Adebayo, a man whose importance was measured by the size of his belly and the gold threads in his agbada, scrambled forward, his face a mask of confusion and sycophantic greed. His wife, Yejide, a woman whose smile was 40% real and 60% cosmetic dentistry, was right behind him, already calculating. She smoothed down her silk wrapper, her eyes wide. Who was this? A politician? A foreign investor? The man in the suit ignored them. His eyes, deep and piercing, scanned the crowd, passing over the important faces, the wealthy traders, the village elders. He walked past the chief as if he were a stray dog, not even granting him a glance. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The disrespect was monumental. Chief Adebayo's jaw hung open. Yujide's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of indignant fury. The man's gaze finally settled on a figure standing near the back by the old cassava stall. A young woman, Amara. She was wearing a simple Ankara dress, clean but faded from 1,000 washes. Her hands, calloused from years of farm work, were clutching a small basket of herbs. She looked as terrified as everyone else, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. And then the unthinkable happened. The man, this king from another universe, walked directly to her. He stopped a few feet away, and his expression, previously unreadable, softened into something gentle, something achingly familiar. The crowd held its breath. And then he knelt, on one knee. In his $1,000 suit, he knelt in the red dust of Orphan, before the orphan girl who owned nothing but the clothes on her back. He held out a small, intricately carved wooden box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was not a ring, but a single, ornate key, forged from what looked like pure gold. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried across the dead silent square with perfect clarity. "Amara," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that made her heart stop. "The hand that gives is the hand that gathers. It is time for you to gather your harvest." The village went completely, utterly silent. The world had just turned upside down. If you love stories where the forgotten are remembered and the proud are humbled, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the reward for a single bowl of soup in this story will build an entire city. The payback is going to be legendary. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. 6 months earlier, Amara was just a ghost in Orphan. At 22, she had already lived a lifetime of hardship. Her parents, a farmer with hands as strong as mahogany roots and a seamstress with a laugh like wind chimes, had been taken by a fever when she was 10. They left her with 2 things: the small, crumbling mud brick hut at the very edge of the village, and a heart full of memories that were both a comfort and a constant, dull ache. She was an orphan, a word that in Otan meant you were less than. You were a loose thread on the village fabric, easily ignored, easily snipped. Her life was a rhythm of survival, dictated by the sun and the soil. She would wake before the first rooster crowed, the cool, pre-dawn air a brief mercy before the oppressive heat of the day. She would tend to her small plot of land behind the hut, a patch of earth her father had taught her to coax life from. She grew yams, cassava, peppers, and a small, precious garden of herbs her mother had cultivated. These herbs were her only real inheritance, a living link to the woman who taught her that a pinch of uziza could wake up a tired soup, and that scent leaf could soothe a troubled spirit. Her hands, though young, were not the hands of a girl. They were the hands of a survivor, etched with the stories of hard soil, sharp weeds, and endless work. After tending her garden, she would walk the 2 miles to the market, her wares balanced perfectly on her head. In the bustling Otan market, she was an island of quiet dignity. While other sellers shouted and cajoled, Amara sat on a small wooden stool, her herbs and vegetables arranged in neat, humble piles on a worn cloth. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. Her voice was soft, and she was often overlooked in favor of the louder, more aggressive merchants. The true rulers of the market, and indeed the village, were Chief Adebayo and his wife, Yejide. The chief was a man who had inherited his position and wore it like an oversized robe, constantly tripping over his own importance. He was corrupt in a lazy, predictable way, skimming from village funds and demanding tributes from the market vendors. But it was Yejide who was the true terror. She moved through the market like a hawk, her eyes missing nothing. She was a woman who had clawed her way up from a modest background and now guarded her new status with a vicious cruelty, directed primarily at those who reminded her of where she came from. Amara was her favorite target. Yejide seemed to take a personal, perverse pleasure in humiliating the quiet orphan girl. She would stop by Amara's stall, not to buy, but to sneer. "Oh, look," she would say loudly, so the nearby vendors could hear. "The little mouse is selling her weeds again. Tell me, child, do you eat these yourself? Is that why you are so thin, like a dry stick?" Amara would never respond. Flicked a coin onto Amara's cloth. A coin flicked a coin onto Amara's cloth. A coin not even worth enough to buy a single pepper. "For your troubles," she had said, her lip curled in disgust. It must be so exhausting being so nothing. But the worst encounter, the one that had burned itself into Amara's memory, happened during the annual levy collection. The chief's men came through the market, collecting a tax from every seller. The fee was modest for most, but for Amara, it was a significant portion of her day's earnings. That day, she was short. She had only made a handful of sales. She was exactly 50 naira short. She had explained this quietly, shamefaced, to the chief's man. He was about to wave her on, a flicker of pity in his eyes, but Yejide had materialized at his shoulder. "What is the problem here?" she had demanded. The man explained. Yejide had laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. 50 naira? She had boomed, turning to the crowd that was now gathering. This girl, who sits here day after day, cannot even afford 50 naira. She looked directly at Amara, her eyes cold and hard as river stones. Ashes will always be ashes, no matter how much you wish to be fire. Go home, little ash girl. This market is for people who contribute, not for beggars. The shame was a physical thing. It felt like a hot cloak wrapped around her, suffocating her. She had packed her things, her hands trembling so badly she could barely tie the knot in her cloth. She had walked home, the laughter of the other vendors following her like a pack of hyenas. That night, she hadn't eaten. She had sat in her small hut, the darkness a welcome shield, and she cried. It was the first time she had cried in years. A hard, painful cry for her parents, for her loneliness, for the sheer, grinding injustice of it all. But Amara was her father's daughter. She was resilient. After the tears, she found a quiet strength. She remembered her grandmother, a woman with a face like a beautiful cracked map and eyes that held the wisdom of generations. Her grandmother had been the one to comfort her after her parents' death, holding her small hand and telling her stories. One proverb, in particular, had stuck with her. The hand that gives, Nana Efe would say, her voice a low, comforting rumble, is the hand that gathers. It is a law of the universe, my child. What you send out will always find its way back to you. Amara had held on to that proverb like a talisman. It was the philosophy that guided her small life. When the neighbor's child was sick, she would take over a broth made with her best healing herbs, asking for nothing in return. When an elderly woman in the market dropped her basket of tomatoes, Amara was the first to help her pick them up, even though her own sales were suffering. How she kept the flame of her parents' kindness alive in a world that seemed determined to extinguish it. She would not let the cruelty of Yejide and the village turn her heart to stone. She would be fire, she promised herself, even if she felt like ashes, a small, steady, hidden fire. And so her life continued, a quiet cycle of work, solitude, and small, unseen acts of kindness. She didn't know it, but fate was watching. The universe was taking note, and the law her grandmother spoke of was about to be tested in a way she could never have imagined. A stranger was coming to Otan, a man who would change everything. He arrived on a Tuesday, during the hottest part of the day, when the sun was a merciless hammer in the sky. He was an old man, or at least he appeared to be. He shuffled into the village square, his back bent, his clothes little more than patched-together rags. His face was obscured by a thick, unkempt gray beard, and his eyes, when you could see them, seemed cloudy and lost. He carried a wooden begging bowl held out by a hand that trembled slightly. The villagers of Otan reacted with predictable disdain. Beggars were not uncommon, but they were usually from neighboring villages, passing through. This one seemed to intend to stay. He sat by the main well, the social heart of the village, and held out his bowl. Women coming to fetch water tutted and pulled their children away, whispering about disease and laziness. Men spat on the ground near his feet. A group of young boys, emboldened by the adults' contempt, threw small stones at him, laughing when he flinched. Chief Adebayo, holding court under the shade of a large mango tree, saw the commotion. Annoyed, he sent one of his attendants. "Get that filth out of here," he commanded, without even bothering to look up from his game of Ao. "We have a reputation to maintain." The attendant, a burly man eager to please, strode over to the beggar and kicked his bowl, sending it clattering across the dusty ground. "Go now, old man," he snarled. "This is not a place for your kind." The beggar didn't say a word. He slowly, painfully, bent to retrieve his bowl. He looked up at the faces staring at him, faces filled with contempt, with disgust, with cold indifference. He saw Yejide watching from the entrance of her fabric shop, a smirk on her face. Not one person offered a kind word. Not one person offered a drop of water. With a quiet sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he picked himself up and shuffled away, disappearing down the path that led out of the village. Amara had seen it all from her stall at the far end of the market. She had watched with a familiar ache in her chest. She knew what it was to be looked at like you were nothing, to be dismissed and discarded. Her heart went out to the old man. She thought of her own father, how he would have been the first to offer the man a seat in the shade and a cup of water. The memory strengthened her resolve. That evening, as the sun bled orange and purple across the sky, Amara was in her hut, preparing her dinner. It was a meager meal, a simple soup made from the last of her yams, some peppers, and a handful of scent leaf from her garden. The aroma filled the small space, a comforting, savory steam. As she was about to eat, she glanced out of her small window, and she saw him, the old beggar. He was huddled at the base of the great ancient baobab tree that stood just outside the village limits, a place where outcasts and spirits were said to dwell. He looked smaller and more defeated than ever. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, as clear as if she were standing right there. The hand that gives is the hand that gathers. Amara looked at the single bowl of soup on her table. It was her only food for the night. Her stomach rumbled in protest. It wasn't enough for two people, but it was more than enough for one. Without a second thought, she took the bowl. She walked out of her hut, across the dusty patch of land, to the ancient baobab tree. The old man looked up as she approached, his eyes wary, expecting another blow, another insult. Amara said nothing. She simply knelt down, just as the man in the suit would one day kneel to her, and placed the warm bowl of soup in his trembling hands. She also placed a small calabash of water beside it. "Eat," she said softly. Her voice was the first kind sound he had heard all day. He stared at her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. Then he looked down at the soup, a thick, fragrant stew that smelled of home and of care. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He nodded, a gesture of profound gratitude, and began to eat. Amara watched him for a moment, then turned and walked back to her hut, her own hunger completely forgotten. She didn't know it, but she had just passed the most important test of her life. This became their ritual. Every evening, the old man, whom she learned was called Kale, would be waiting by the baobab tree, and every evening, Amara would bring him a portion of her own dinner. Sometimes it was soup, sometimes roasted plantain, sometimes a simple porridge of millet. It was never much, but it was always given freely, a shared meal between two people on the margins of the world. The village, of course, noticed, and they mocked her relentlessly. Yejide was particularly vicious. She saw Amara walking towards the baobab tree one evening and called out from her veranda, her voice dripping with scorn. "Feeding a ghost, Amara? I suppose it makes sense. She shares her nothing with another nothing." The women with her tittered, their laughter sharp and cruel in the twilight air. Amara kept walking, her back straight, her head held high. Their words were just noise. The quiet gratitude in the old man's eyes was the only thing that mattered. Slowly, over weeks of shared meals under the silent watch of the baobab, Kale began to talk. His voice was rough from disuse at first, but it grew stronger. He asked her about her life, not with the intrusive curiosity of a gossip, but with a genuine, gentle interest. Amara found herself opening up to him in a way she never had with anyone else. She told him about her parents, painting pictures with her words of her father's booming laugh and her mother's nimble fingers. She told him about her small garden, describing the joy she felt when a new shoot pushed its way through the soil. One evening, he asked her about her dreams. "What would you do, Amara, if you could do anything?" Amara was quiet for a long time, tracing patterns in the dust with her finger. No one had ever asked her that before. "I would like to have a small eatery," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Not a fancy one, just a clean, warm place. A place where anyone who was hungry could come and get a good meal. No one would ever be turned away. No one would ever have to feel the shame of an empty stomach." She looked at him, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "My grandmother used to say that feeding someone is like planting a seed in their soul. I would like to plant a lot of seeds." Cale listened to her, his gaze unwavering. He saw it all: the quiet strength, the profound empathy, the spirit that had refused to be broken by years of hardship and cruelty. This was it. This was the authenticity he had been searching for. He had been a wealthy man his entire life, surrounded by people who saw him as a walking bank vault. His first wife had loved his credit card more than his heart. His business partners had smiled to his face while plotting to steal from him behind his back. The world he came from was a world of surfaces, of performance, of transactional relationships. It had left him feeling hollow, empty, and deeply lonely. After a particularly painful betrayal, he had walked away from it all, seeking something real. He had come to Otan, the village his own grandfather had left as a poor boy, on a desperate quest. He had disguised himself as the lowest of the low, a beggar, to see if a single seed of genuine human kindness still existed. He had almost given up hope. And then he met Amara. In return for her food, Cale started bringing her small gifts. They were never things of monetary value. One day, it was a perfectly smooth, gray river stone, shaped almost like a heart. He told her to keep it in her pocket for strength. Another day, he brought her a handful of a rare, wild herb he had found deep in the forest. "This," he said, his eyes twinkling, "will make your soup sing." She didn't know it was a variety of wild garlic worth a small fortune to gourmet chefs in the city. To her, it was just a gift from her friend. She accepted each one with a smile, treasuring the thought behind it more than the object itself. One week, a fever swept through the village. Amara fell ill. For 2 days, she was too weak to leave her hut, her body racked with chills and aches. But even in her sickness, she thought of Cale. On the third evening, though she was still dizzy and weak, she forced herself to her small cooking pot. She made a simple, nourishing broth, using the last of her healing herbs. It took all of her strength to carry the bowl to the baobab tree. Cale saw her staggering towards him, her face pale and beaded with sweat. He rushed to help her, his movements surprisingly agile for an old man. "You are sick," he said, his voice filled with concern. "You should be resting." Amara shook her head, offering him the bowl. "I made you some soup," she said simply. "You must eat." He looked from her feverish face to the bowl of soup she was offering. In that moment, he knew his search was over. Here was a woman who, in her own sickness and poverty, was still thinking of the welfare of a stranger she believed to be even poorer than herself. This was not kindness. This was grace. He took the bowl, but he didn't eat. He gently led her back to her hut, sat her down, and insisted she drink the broth herself. He then went into the forest and returned with a collection of leaves and roots. He prepared a poultice and a tea, his movements sure and knowledgeable. He tended to her through the night, his presence a quiet, comforting watch. By morning, her fever had broken. As he was leaving, she thanked him, her voice still weak. "You didn't have to do that, Cale." He turned at her doorway and looked at her, his eyes clear and full of a deep, profound respect. But he had to do it right. He had one last thing to do. He had to tell her the truth. But he had to do it right. He had one last thing to set in motion. He disappeared for a few days, and Amara began to worry. She went to the baobab tree each evening, but he wasn't there. She feared he had fallen ill, or worse. Her heart felt heavy with a sense of loss that surprised her. The strange old beggar had become her friend, her only friend. On the fourth day, a car pulled up outside her hut. It wasn't a fancy car. It was a 10-year-old Toyota sedan, clean but unremarkable. A young man in a simple but well-fitting shirt got out from the driver's side. He opened the back door. The man who stepped out was not Cale the beggar. He was tall and straight-backed. His silver-flecked hair was neatly trimmed, and his beard was gone, revealing a strong, kind face. He was wearing a simple linen shirt and trousers, but they fit him with an understated elegance. It took Amara a moment to recognize the eyes. They were Cale's eyes, clear and sharp, but without the cloud of weariness she was used to. She stared, speechless, her mind struggling to reconcile the man before her with the frail beggar she had been feeding for months. "Hello, Amara," he said, his voice the same gentle rumble, but without the rasp of feigned age. "May we come in?" She could only nod, stepping back into her small, clean hut. The two men entered. It was suddenly very crowded. The young driver, who introduced himself as Femi, stood respectfully by the door, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Amara," Cale began, his voice serious, "I have not been entirely honest with you. My name is not Cale. It is Kalen Adekunle." The name meant nothing to Amara, but she could see from the way he held himself, from the quiet authority that radiated from him, that he was someone important. "I am a businessman," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "I came to Otan looking for something. I have spent my life surrounded by people who wanted what I have, not who I am. They see my wealth, my power, my influence. They don't see the man. So I decided to come here, to my grandfather's village, with nothing. I wanted to see if I could find one person who would show kindness to a man who could do absolutely nothing for them in return." He paused, letting the words sink in. Amara's heart was pounding. She felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the solid ground beneath her feet had turned to water. "For weeks, I found nothing but cruelty and indifference," Kalen said, his voice soft. "I was about to give up. And then I met you." He looked around her small hut, at the neatly swept floor, the single cooking pot, the small pile of herbs drying in the corner. He saw not poverty, but dignity. "You had almost nothing," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "But you gave me half of it. For a reward. You did it because that is for a reward. You did it because that is who you are." Amara was shaking her head, trying to process the information. It was too much. The beggar, the kind old man, was a rich man in disguise. It felt like a folktale, a dream, a wave of disbelief, and then, strangely, humor washed over her. "So, the rare herb wasn't just a weed?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Femi, the driver, coughed to hide a laugh. "Sir, she thinks you were giving her weeds," he said, his deadpan delivery breaking the tension. Kalen smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "No, Amara, that weed is called African wild garlic. It sells for over 20,000 naira a kilogram in the city." Amara's jaw dropped. She had been seasoning her yam soup with a small fortune. The absurdity of it was overwhelming. She started to laugh, a shaky, tear-filled laugh of pure shock. And then the tears came in earnest. Not tears of sadness, but tears of release, of confusion, of a deep, soul-shaking overwhelm. This was the second time she had cried in years. and it felt like a dam breaking inside her. Kalen waited patiently for her tears to subside. He then leaned forward, his expression earnest. Amara, I came here looking for a person, but I found a partner. I want to build my company's philanthropic headquarters here in Oton, a foundation dedicated to education, healthcare, and sustainable agriculture for this entire region. But a foundation is just a building and a bank account. It needs a heart. It needs a soul. I want you to be that heart. I want you to run it. Amara stared at him, her eyes wide. Me? But I have no education. I don't know anything about business. You are the most qualified person I have ever met, he interrupted gently. You understand the true meaning of wealth. You understand people. We can hire experts for the rest. And your dream, your eatery, where no one goes hungry. I don't want to just fund a small eatery, Amara. I want to build the Kalen Amara Culinary Institute of West Africa, a world-class institution right here in Oton that will train chefs, celebrate our cuisine, and have at its core a simple, unbreakable rule. No one who comes to its doors hungry is ever, ever turned away. It was too much. The scale of his vision, the sheer magnitude of his offer, was beyond her ability to comprehend. Why? She finally whispered, the question that had been burning in her mind. Why me? Kalen's answer was simple, and it landed with the force of a revelation. He reached out and gently touched the back of her calloused hand. Because your grandmother was right, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The hand that gives is the hand that gathers. You have been giving your whole life, Amara, and I am here to help you gather. My entire empire, my entire fortune, it's all just a tool. And I want to put that tool in your hands, because I know you will use it to build, not to break, to heal, not to harm. He told her about the new Yam Festival just a few weeks away. He wanted to make the announcement then to the entire village. He wanted to show them what real power looked like, not the blustering, hollow power of a corrupt chief, but the quiet, immense power of a generous heart. He asked her to trust him. Looking into his clear, honest eyes, the same eyes she had come to trust under the baobab tree, she found that she did. The day of the new Yam Festival arrived, and Oton was electric with excitement. It was the biggest celebration of the year, a day of feasting, dancing, and showing off. The village square was decorated with palm fronds and colorful banners. The air was thick with the smell of roasted yams and spicy goat stew. Chief Adebayo and Yejide were in their element, presiding over the festivities like a king and queen. The chief wore an agbada of shimmering gold lace, and Yejide was draped in expensive imported fabrics, her neck and wrists heavy with gold. They moved through the crowd, accepting praise and tributes, their faces beaming with self-satisfaction. Amara stood at the edge of the square, near the cassava stall where she usually sat. She felt out of place. Kalen had sent a tailor from the city who had created a simple but exquisitely made dress for her from deep blue Ankara fabric that shimmered with threads of gold. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever owned. She felt a nervous flutter in her stomach. She had no idea what to expect. Femi, Kalen's driver, and now her quiet protector, stood a few feet away, his expression as unreadable as ever. At precisely noon, as Chief Adebayo was raising a ceremonial horn of palm wine to his lips to deliver a long, self-congratulatory speech, a low rumble began to sound in the distance. The rumble grew into the powerful thrum of high-performance engines. All heads turned towards the main road leading into the village, and then they appeared. The fleet of 5 gleaming black cars, moving with a slow, deliberate majesty that sucked all the air out of the square. The music stopped. The chatter died. The chief's horn of palm wine froze halfway to his mouth. The scene from the cold open began to unfold. But this time, Amara understood. This time, she wasn't afraid. When Kalen stepped out of the Maybach, a murmur of disbelief went through the crowd. Is that? It can't be. The beggar? The old man? But it was. The same face, the same eyes, but transformed. He radiated a power and a presence that made Chief Adebayo look like a clown in a borrowed costume. The chief and Yejide stumbled forward, their faces a comical mixture of shock and dawning, desperate greed. My son, welcome, Chief Adebayo bellowed, his voice suddenly oily and servile. We did not know who you were. Forgive our humble village's poor hospitality. He shot a venomous glare at the attendant who had kicked Kalen's bowl. The attendant seemed to shrink, trying to disappear into the crowd. Yejide was practically vibrating with excitement, her smile stretched to its limit. Ah, a man of quiet humility. We admire that here in Otan. A test, yes? You were testing our character. Kalen's face remained a mask of calm. He walked past them without a word, his gaze fixed on Amara. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea. He stopped before her, and the world seemed to hold its breath. And then he knelt. The sound of 100 simultaneous gasps was like a sudden wind. He opened the carved box, revealing the golden key. Amara, he said, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. The hand that gives is the hand that gathers. It is time for you to gather your harvest. He placed the key in her trembling hand. He then stood up and turned to face the village. His voice now was not gentle. It was steel. My name is Kalen Adekunle. My grandfather was born in this village. He left with nothing but the shirt on his back because he saw that Otan was a place that valued gold more than goodness. I see that some things have not changed. I came here as a beggar to see if that was still true. For weeks, you showed me nothing but your contempt. You mocked me. You threw stones at me. You kicked my bowl and threw me out of your square. He pointed a finger directly at Chief Adebayo, who flinched as if struck. You, Chief, you saw a man in need and you called him filth. His finger moved to Yejide, who had gone pale, her painted smile frozen in a rictus of horror. And you, madam, you are a woman who enjoys cruelty. You take pleasure in humiliating those with less than you. I believe you have a special name for this woman beside me. Ash Girl, wasn't it? He let the accusation hang in the dead air. You said, ashes will always be ashes. You were wrong. Today, the fire you dismissed will warm this entire region. He raised his voice, addressing the entire crowd. I am announcing the formation of the Adekunle Foundation. Its African headquarters will be built right here in Otan. We will build a new school, a modern hospital, and bring clean water to every single home. He paused, letting the news sink in. There were murmurs of excitement, of disbelief. This foundation will be chaired and its vision will be guided by the only person in this village who understood what wealth truly is. He placed a hand on Amara's shoulder. This is Amara, your new leader. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a world reordering itself. Kalen then turned his devastatingly calm gaze back to the chief. The Foundation will need to acquire land for its projects. We will be buying that land directly from the families of Otan at 10 times the current market value. Every family will prosper. Every child will have a future. But your position, Chief, your performative, corrupt, and meaningless authority is now redundant. The government has already been notified. A new council, chosen by the people and overseen by the Foundation, will be formed. Your reign is over. He delivered the final words with no anger, no malice, just a simple statement of fact, which made it all the more brutal. Yejide looked like she was going to faint. The gold on her neck suddenly looked cheap and gaudy. The aftermath was as swift as it was transformative. Otan became a beacon of progress. The Adekunle Foundation, under Amara's quiet but firm guidance, was not just a source of money, it was a source of hope. The new school was built first, bright and airy, with the best teachers and resources. The hospital followed, a state-of-the-art facility that served the entire region. The Culinary Institute became Amara's passion project. It rose on the outskirts of the village, a beautiful complex of training kitchens, lecture halls, and a 5-star restaurant that drew visitors from all over the world. It celebrated West African cuisine, elevating the very dishes Amara had grown up with to the level of fine art. And at its back door, there was a simple, clean kitchen with a sign that read, "The Baobab Cafe." Here, the Institute's founding rule was honored every single day. No one was ever turned away hungry. A warm, nutritious meal was available to anyone who asked. No questions, no judgment. Amara blossomed. She was no longer the ghost of Otan. She was its heart. She moved with a newfound confidence, but she never lost her humility, her gentleness. She remembered the names of every worker on the construction sites. She knew the children in the new school. She listened to the concerns of the village elders. Kalen was her constant partner. His love and respect for her, a quiet, steady presence. He had found in her not just a kind heart, but a sharp mind and a natural leader. They were a formidable team. Their partnership built not on a fairy tale romance, but on a deep, shared foundation of values. For Chief Adebayo and Yejide, the fall was as dramatic as Amara's rise. Their power had been an illusion, built on the fear and deference of the villagers. Once that was gone, they had nothing. Their wealth, too, was a sham, a mountain of debt hidden behind a facade of gold lace and imported fabric. Creditors they had been holding off for years came calling. They lost their big house, their cars, their fancy clothes. They were forced to move into a small, rented room, becoming the very thing they had despised, poor and insignificant. The village, now prospering, simply ignored them. Their cruelty had earned them no loyalty, no friends. They were ghosts now. About a year after the foundation was established, a woman in a worn, faded wrapper came to the back door of the Culinary Institute, to the Baobab Cafe. She was thin, and her face was etched with lines of worry and hunger. Her eyes were downcast, full of a shame that was deep and painful. It was Yejide. She had heard the rumors that they gave away food, and after 2 days with nothing to eat, her pride had finally crumbled. A young student chef was about to give her a standard meal pack when Amara, who was doing her daily walkthrough, saw her. Amara paused. She looked at the woman who had caused her so much pain, the woman who had called her ashes. There was no triumph in her eyes, no satisfaction. There was only a deep, quiet pity. She walked over and gently touched Yejide's arm. Yejide flinched, looking up in terror, finally recognizing her. The fear in her eyes was quickly replaced by a wave of crushing humiliation. She tried to turn and flee, but Amara's grip was gentle but firm. Wait, Amara said softly. She went into the main kitchen and returned, not with a prepackaged meal, but with a warm, fragrant bowl of her signature yam and uziza soup, the best soup the Institute made. It was the same kind of soup she had once given to a beggar under a baobab tree. She placed it in Yejide's trembling hands. Yejide stared at the soup, then at Amara, her eyes filling with tears. She expected a lecture, a gloating remark, a final twist of the knife, but it never came. Amara looked at her and said the words that would finally break through the woman's hardened heart. No one is only ashes, Yejide. Everyone has a fire inside. Sometimes it just needs a little warmth to be relit. Eat. In that moment of devastating, unexpected grace, Yejide finally understood. She sat down on the steps, the former queen of Otan, and ate the soup given to her by the ash girl, her body shaking with silent, cleansing sobs. It was the best meal she had ever tasted. True wealth is not what you keep in your bank account, but what you give from your heart. It is measured not by the car you drive, but by the character that drives you. The world will often tell you to build walls, to protect what is yours, to look upon the less fortunate with suspicion. But the oldest magic, the truest law of the universe, is generosity. For in the end, a palace built on greed will crumble into dust, but a simple hut built on kindness can become the cornerstone of an empire. What you send out into the world will always, always find its way back to you. If this story moved your heart, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because every tale has a lesson, and Alfred's Folktales never forgets.